Now it's time to look forward to the tournament itself. I'm Ed Dove. I'm joined here by Colin, Udoh and Leonard Solms. And guys, there's only one place to start when it comes to previewing the Nations Cup, and that is the hosts, Morocco. They're the hosts. Are they also the favourites? Colin, let's start with you. Can you give us your feelings, your debrief on the Atlas Lion?
Yeah, I should think so. I mean, it's hard to rule them out. One, they're the hosts, and if there's one thing we know about AFCON, it is that the hosts always tend to do well. They might not always win it, but they always tend to be there or thereabouts. And of course, we know the progress Morocco has made over the last few years. So you can definitely see them going really far. Not to mention, I think they still hold the record for the longest unbeaten streak in the world after they overtook Spain. And, when you put all that together, and also they've got the top scorer, Brahima Diaz, from qualifying. So you've got to believe that, it is hard to rule them out again, like I said. Maybe they don't have a different idea.
I think that probably the biggest challenge that they're going to have to overcome is one of their best players, Achraf Hakimi, not being quite at peak fitness heading into this tournament. It looks like he's a doubt for their opening few games. Time can only tell if he will be at his best as the tournament progresses, but that's something that could certainly be a challenge. But I certainly agree with Colin. I would have Morocco as favourites for this tournament.
I think the way they handled the World Cup qualification for me was seriously impressive. The first time ever that an African team has enjoyed a 100% record during World Cup qualification. I think that can't be ignored. Obviously, they've got the experience of going deep in tournaments after the run to the semi-finals in the World Cup, where a lot of these guys were still present. I think the group is decent. I think they shouldn't have too much trouble with Zambia, Comoros, and Mali. The only thing for me is that I've predicted Morocco will get to the final at least in the last two Nations Cups. And they've ended up letting me down. And we can't forget, this is a team that haven't won the tournament since the late 70s. So there is a bit of a weight of history there. And I think it remains to be seen whether perhaps the pressure and the expectation back at home will get to them. We saw a little bit with the women's team, perhaps in the final of the Women's Africa Cup of Nations in the summer. And it'll be interesting where the Atlas Lions, where the Walid Regragui's team fall into a similar trap. When we look at the other potential favourites, we've got Senegal, we've got Algeria, who have been mentioned strongly. Leonard, for you, which of these two is perhaps the most likely contender to Morocco?
I would say Senegal. I think that they're at a little bit of an inflection point. I think that it's the generation that led them to the 2021 AFCON title. Obviously, the tournament held belatedly in 2022. That generation's on its way out. A new generation is on its way in, but still an unbelievably balanced side. And I think that they certainly will be one of the, if not the toughest, challenges to Morocco. There's certainly a few dark horses that could upset the apple cart. Algeria, I wouldn't even describe as a dark horse. They are one of the favorites as well. But Senegal, for me, is a very, very impressive and very balanced side.
Yeah, I love some of this kind of new generation coming into the Senegal team since they won the Nations Cup. Like defenders like Moussa Niakate, Diouf of West Ham, for example, who's looked pretty impressive after moving to the Premier League from Czech. Guys like Mamadou Sarr, Abdoulaye Seck in defence, who are this kind of new crop coming through, but they're actually some of the most impressive African players in Europe's major leagues so far this season. And Colin, obviously, Senegal have an amazing wealth of attacking talent. Iliman Ndiaye of Everton, Sadio Mane, Nicholas Jackson, Ismaila Sarr. Which of these players impresses you the most? Which of Senegal's attacking options do you think could really set the tournament alight?
I think you've got to, it's hard to look beyond or far away from Nicholas Jackson. I mean, he did take some early criticism, with his maybe not enough goal scoring, but I think he's got over that hump and he's delivering now on a more regular basis. And I think that, coming to the AFCON, you've got to look at him and think between him and, Mane, the aging Mane, they should be able to, ruffle a few feathers. But yeah, I do like the looks of from Nicholas Jackson.
I think Algeria as well under Petkovic will be there or thereabouts. It'll be interesting to see how they fare on Moroccan soil. But those midfield options like Benacer, Hisham Bedoui, Awara as well as Mohamed Amora, who is the top scorer in World Cup qualification for Algeria. This is a very decent team who people aren't really talking about as much. Obviously, with Riyad Mahrez, a veteran, been there, he's done that, he's won it before. Algeria, anyone giving them any chance of going the distance?
Oh, I certainly do. I mean, they just won it. What was it? 4 years ago, just before Senegal. So, and you've got to look at them and think, hey, look, you know what? This is not a team that you could rule out. And I do believe that, with the players they've got coming through, that Algeria stand a very, very good chance. But hey, you know what? One thing, Ed, I'd wait for you to predict because you almost always seem to get things wrong. So please don't make any predictions for Morocco, because if you do, they're definitely going to lose.
Well, you'll be delighted to know that my prediction on Nigeria, which we should probably talk about now, Super Eagles to go one better than they did in Ivory Coast last time around. Colin, obviously, we don't want to dwell for your own well-being too much on the World Cup qualifying campaign, but how does that failure change the prospect of this Nations Cup for the Super Eagles?
I think Nigeria at the stage now where, and maybe you might be surprised, I don't think Nigeria will finish in the top two, because there's just a lot going on there in that squad. The team is due for a refresh, and it's a good thing to see that the coach has brought in, I think, 5 new players, even though one of them is 31 on his way out of on his way out of a football career. But I think that rather than think about winning the Nations Cup, Nigeria should be looking at this as more of a chance to start a rebuild process that takes the team all the way to the 2030 World Cup qualifying. But, you look at everything that's going on, and I don't think that Nigeria should be considered one of the favorites for the summer. I think they'll be more like the dark horses, so to speak.
Are you the real Colin Udoh, or are you a lookalike?
Yeah, it's a clone talking.
It's not like you to be pessimistic about the Super Eagles' chances and to be using the AFCON as a rebuild. You've got Africa's finest striker in Victor Osimhen. You've got some wonderful players like Iwobi, Calvin Bassey, Chukwueze, arguably the informed player in the Premier League over the last 5 match days. Expectations as well. Sure, and Eric Chele's recent form has been pretty decent. Surely there's enough there that you should be targeting at least the semi-finals in Morocco.
I'll tell you what. And you know me, I'm usually very optimistic about the Super Eagles when it comes to them at the AFCON. But I would be very, very surprised, and I mean really surprised, if they get past the quarterfinals.
Can you just shed a little light on William Troost-Ekong's decision to retire just before the Nations Cup? Because I read some quotes from him where he was explaining that it just felt like the right time, but that's not really a reason to kind of abandon shit just before an AFCON where you're decently positioned to maybe go deep in the competition. For you, what's your reading of Troost-Ekong's decision to retire at this point?
It wasn't a question of abandoning ship. I'll tell you what. But just after the last AFCON, he had been mulling plans to retire. But then World Cup qualifying came in thick and fast, and we had to go right into that. But toward the end of the World Cup qualifying, he had told everyone in the dressing room, and I got this from multiple player unofficial sources, that he had already informed the team that he would not be taking part at AFCON just before the World Cup qualifiers rolled to an end. So it was just a question of when he would make the announcement official. Even the coach including his name in the squad was meant to be something of a red herring, because they didn't want to make it look as if he retired because he was left out of the AFCON squad. We know that he had been, the pace had gone a little bit somewhat, and then with the arrival of Benjamin Fredericks, his starting position had been kind of like gone away, and minutes have been restricted. So it was the right time for him to go, and it's a good thing that he went on a high. I wouldn't call it abandoning ship, but I do think that it was a good time for him to call it.
Well, I'm not sure I would call failing to reach the World Cup leaving on a high, but if you want to see it that way, fair enough. Where does this leave Nigeria's defence with a few questions about the goalkeeper situation? your defensive leader, even if he's maybe not a guaranteed starter, not in the team. Is this an area of vulnerability for the Super Eagles, or do you still think Nigeria have one of the better defenses in the competition?
Defense has more or less always been a vulnerability. Even at the last AFCON, where the team kind of rallied together and put things together. Now, if Benjamin Fredericks, who had taken Echo's place in defense, had been fully fit, I'd have said it wasn't really that much of a problem. But now it is. So it will now depend on how someone like Ryan Alebios, who's coming in, how he fits in there, whether he's going to make an instant impact. Because right now we've got like Shemia Ajayi, Calvin Bassey, you've got Olayano is not there, Zaidu Sanusi at left back. So that defense is, it looks strong, but it's the kind of strong that you think, well, it just takes just one little thing and everything will just go crumbling now.
Yeah, I think Ryan Alabiosu of Blackburn Rovers, uncapped, named in the squad, potentially now set for a prominent role with the Super Eagles. It could be one of the stories to watch of the group stage. Leonard, you've seen Nigeria up front recently when they played against the Bafana South Africa during World Cup qualifying. What did you make of this team? Do you think that's a side who we should be considering? Do you think quarterfinals is realistic, or do you think Colin's being a little bit too pessimistic there?
I think that's more or less realistic. Of course, the Super Eagles have fantastic players. Even when they're not at their best, any team with the attacking talent, especially that Nigeria have, you can never quite write them off. You never know what's going to happen. But it was a bit of a surprise to me in a FIFA World Cup qualifying group to see that even with the wealth of options up front, Nigeria sometimes struggled to break down defenses. It certainly got better as qualifiers progressed. I think Eric Chell has done a good job. I actually have a question for Colin. I remember Colin saying a little while ago, I don't know if it was brighter times for Nigeria or darker times for South Africa, that he doesn't consider the rivalry between Nigeria and South Africa to be a real rivalry. I wonder if that one's changed at all, given the recent shift in the balance of power.
I don't know, that's a phantom shift because there really isn't a shift. Bafana haven't really won against Nigeria. Most of those games have been draws. And to be honest, it really isn't a rivalry. It is a rivalry when one wins, the other loses every now and then. But this is almost always a beatdown. The only time South Africa get a result is they get a draw. They've only won one game of consequence against Nigeria. The rest has either been a beatdown or draw. So, Nigeria and South Africa are not really rivals. Nigeria is, like I said, Nigeria beat South Africa to Lobola a long time ago.
But a rivalry, but obviously it will be South Africa who are going to the World Cup. And in terms of the AFCON, Leonard, how do you fancy Bafana's chances? They did very well at the last tournament in Cote d'Ivoire, surprised many people, got to the semi-finals. Do you think a repeat is on the cards this time around?
I think it would certainly be less of a surprise if Bafana go far in this tournament. I could even picture a run perhaps as far as the final. Of course, I'm naturally an optimist about this team. Realistic enough to know that Bafana are not the favorites for this tournament. As I said in our previous conversation, this team is not yet at the peak of its cycle. There's still some systemic issues within South African football, the finances of the association that need to be addressed. There've been some issues in the camp recently with Hugo Bruce's comments on Mbekezeli Mbokazi, the rising star centre back that didn't help the preparation. I don't envision that completely derailing Bafana. I think Hugo Bruce, it was a little bit of a shock to the system when he first arrived in South Africa, his sometimes brash way of speaking. But I think that even though these recent comments weren't well received, on many other occasions, his approach to managing players, although it was different to what South Africans were used to, proved quite effective. So I think he's built up credits in the bank and apologized for those comments today. Rightly so, I must add, in my opinion. I think Bafana have a really, really balanced squad in terms of some really, really fantastic young wingers coming through, very, very strong defensive structure. I've spoken before about centre back being a position of particular strength. But I think that in the end, this team is to need a little bit of experience. I think of those really, really those deep runs in AFCON tournaments. I think that it's really helped that Mamelodi Sundowns in particular have done well in CAF tournaments. So they do know how hostile it can get at times and how to deal with those situations. I feel though when it's crunch time, first of all, although Lyle Foster is in my opinion a great striker, I do think that there isn't quite enough depth in that position up front. Quite enough quality, quite the quality to be fair to rival the likes of Nigeria at striker. And I think that experience in the later stages of the tournament, a little bit more senior players in the squad might be needed. But we'll see how far this team can go within the next 4 years or so. I'm definitely optimistic for the future of South African football. And I think that Bafana will go far, just not quite all the way.
I just want to go back to your comments on what you said about Hugo Bruce and what he said about Mukazi. How have those comments, which led to accusations of racism, of sexism, how have they been received back home in the South African media? And you say they won't derail the campaign, but is there an extent to which that may have damaged the coach's relationship with his players? Because it seems like a strength of Bruce since he's taken over has been to forge quite a unified group. And comments like that publicly about a player they're not the kind of thing you can easily just forget and move on from, in my opinion.
I do agree with you. Everyone who I've spoken to, the sense is pretty much what I'd said before, that whatever gripes people may have, it's not, in their opinion, so serious that this needs to completely derail all the good work that's gone in before. I certainly do think it's not the sort of thing that can just be moved on from. Obviously, we've seen a political party in South Africa, the United Democratic Movement, lodge a complaint with the South African Human Rights Commission. I think that we need to remember as well, agents are very important in players' lives. So comments like this, it touches on something quite sensitive. Basia Michaels, Mbekezeli Mbokazi's agent, I must say, is very well respected in South African football. And I must add though that there is a feeling that although the coach, by his own admission, chose the wrong words, I would say badly wrong words. There is a feeling that he was right to criticize Mbekezeli Mbokazi on his lateness in this incident. One argument I've seen brought up is that Bafana's squad right now is very, very competitive. There were so many great players who wanted to be in the squad and didn't make it. Hugo Bruce went out on a limb, gave the position to a 20-year-old. But now there's already been an issue with discipline. Therefore, it needs to be addressed. But the way he chose to address it wasn't right and could cause problems.
Thank you. I think we have to also talk about, speaking of problems, we have to talk about Egypt, and we have to talk about the way that Mohamed Salah's comments recently to the mixed zone after Liverpool's draw with Leeds may or may not impact Egypt's Nations Cup campaigns. Colin, obviously Salah's now returned to action for Liverpool just before the Nations Cup. But how do you see, if at all, those comments and his relationship with Arne Slot, his relationship with Liverpool, impacting his campaign with Egypt?
To be honest, I'm not sure what's going on in Liverpool is going to affect what's going on in Egypt, because this is purely, it's not even, I wouldn't even call it a Salah Liverpool issue. Like you said, it's a Salah Slot issue. So, and if you look at the last game, at the end of the game, you saw Salah going around, sort of like getting a huge applause from the fans at Anfield. That looked like a god level trolling against Arne Slot. So the Liverpool fans still love him, obviously from that showing, and I'm definitely sure that the Egypt fans love him just as much. So I'm not sure that that's going to have any effect at all on how he plays. For if anything, it's probably fire him up even more to do even better for Egypt and lead them to an AFCON title and give that as some sort of I don't know, figurative middle finger to Arne Slot.
Yeah, I think that the way that the Egyptian players rallied around Salah on social media in the immediate aftermath of those quotes, I think that was very telling. I think it demonstrated, or it reminded us of the reverence in which they hold him. And I think that's something which could actually give a boost to Egypt, to the camp. I think as well, like you say, this sense of, I'll show them what I can do. Potentially, if he's in the shop window, it's also an opportunity for him to appeal to suitors around the world, to remind them just what a player we're talking about. Because if we're being honest, we've not seen it that much in the Premier League so far this season. I think he's had 7 goal contributions so far.
Oh, he hasn't had a chance to show it. He hasn't had much of a chance to show it.
Well, he did have before he was admittedly dropped, but I think before that, there were a lot of games which passed him by a little bit, or he was quite anonymous, struggled to get involved. But for me, the big one with Salah is, I think that club career is one thing, but international career, I think you can argue that it's been a little bit unfulfilled with Egypt. 2 finals. Obviously, he was inspirational as the Pharaohs reached the World Cup in 2018, but injury meant that he struggled to have an impact at that tournament. And now, on paper at least, he has the opportunity of a Nations Cup in North Africa with a decent, if not exceptional, Egypt team. He's fit. And I think this could be the tournament where he really adds his name to the likes of Mahrez and Mane, who were able to couple success at club level with success at international level. So I could see Egypt as one of the contenders of this tournament. And I think for Salah, it's going to be a remarkable personal journey, potentially ending up with the title. We've got a few more minutes left. Are there any other contenders we want to quickly talk about? Maybe
Cameroon?
Or Cameroon, yeah.
Really, Ed? Cameroon?
I'm not sure Cameroon are contenders, but I think it would be interesting for us to talk about Cameroon. So why don't you give a little case for Cameroon? Leonard, you can explain why you're a fan of DRC, and I can maybe talk about Ivory Coast and their title defense quickly. So go ahead, Colin, with Cameroon. What are you expecting?
More implosion. Look, Cameroon, they're the second highest winners of this tournament with 5 next to Egypt's 8. And usually, just like Nigeria, when they come to an AFCON tournament, you've got to put Cameroon there or thereabouts. Now, the problem is all of the self-destruction that's going on there, sparked by Samuel Eto'o feels, which, sort of damages the rhetoric that people talk about having ex-players run football federations in Africa. Samuel Eto'o has just gone there and turned that on his head. So as much as I'd like to say Cameroon have a good chance of doing it just because of the antecedents, I don't think, because, first of all, we don't even know what Cameroon team is going to show up, the one picked by Eto'o or the one picked by Bryce going in there. So, again, just like Nigeria, I don't think Cameroon are going to go far.
I would say I think the Mark Brice squad is a little bit of a red herring. I think people have this imagination of this other, like a Cameroon B team turning up, hoping for a kick around. But I can't see that happening. I think it's a little bit of a red herring. One thing I would say is that I don't actually think that Cameroon are that good. Like, even with the players they've got, especially with Anguissa missing, that's the big one for me. Everyone's talking about Aboubakar or Onana, but Zambo Anguissa has just turned into an absolute monster at Napoli, and he's such a big missing out through injury. Carlos Balaba's not in great form in midfield, so I don't see the midfield control that we maybe expect from Cameroon in this tournament. And without that, I think they're going to struggle against the better teams. But what I would say, and Leonard, you may remember this from Hugo Bruce's past, is that often when you expect very little from them, that's when they really show what they're really capable of. The Nations Cup in Gabon that Hugo Bruce won, this was a Cameroon team who were absolutely terrible in the group stage. They were hopeless in the group stage. And if it wasn't for Sebastian Siani, I think a late equalizer, if it wasn't for a bit of magic from Mukanjo, they would have been eliminated in the group stage. But guys like Bassagog, guys like Brian and Burmo, I just don't know. If they get it.
Ed, in fairness, that 2017 AFCON was one of, I don't know, you had really terrible teams there. Cameroon were just the best of the worst lot. That 2017 AFCON was I mean, I don't know. It was a terrible AFCON. It was a trash AFCON.
Okay, well, fair enough. That's probably in my place. Leonard, the Leopards. I hear you're quite a fan of what Sebastian de Saba is doing with the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Yes, I think critically they have something that Cameroon don't have, which is stability there in the coaching department. I also just think that a team that's been to the semifinals of the last Africa Cup of Nations should never be written off as dark horses at the very least. As I was saying with regards to Bafana Bafana, experience of going deep in those tournaments always comes in handy. I think that DR Congo has a fantastic diaspora of players to select from. They not only have many players with experience in the Premier League, they also have players who tend to step it up for international duty, the likes of Meshak Elia. I think that they certainly are a team that cannot be counted out. There are many others who threaten to be dark horses, the likes of Mali, for instance. But I think that DR Congo in particular is one that we simply cannot forget about.
I would agree with you. I think they're probably my dark horse pick. They've had a fantastic run under de Saba, but they were unlucky not to top their group. Very tough to beat. They've got a goal threat. I enjoy watching them, and I think they're going to be a team to watch. For me, perhaps another intriguing question mark over the group stage is Cote d'Ivoire, because we've often seen tournament defending champions really struggle. Ivory Coast, of course, were on the brink of having a disastrous campaign last time around before MS Faye took the reins at the end of the group stage and guided them to this inspirational title victory on home soil. Will there still be the same emotional momentum that they started to enjoy in that tournament? I'm not sure. You look at the players who have been left out of the squad: Nicolas Pepe, Simon Adingra, Singo is injured, the defender. And that suggests they've got a real strength and depth, which they do. They've got some really talented players. But with Sebastian Haller now an injury doubt, with aging players like Jean Serry and Willy Bolly, who's made one Premier League start in 18 months, being called up to the squad, that suggests something of a questionable approach by MS Faye. And I just wonder, in a tough group containing Cameroon and Gabon, where the Ivory Coast could be the latest African defending champions to be eliminated early in the competition. I hope not, because I love watching these players. A lot of these players play, not really Willy Bolly anymore. But the rest of them, I love watching them play, and I hope not. But I'm just worried that they might be less than the sum of their parts in this tournament. Right, before we finish, we're going to very quickly go through our player of the tournament, breakout star, and predicted winners. So, Colin, why don't you go first? Let's hear your player, your breakout star, and your predicted winners.
I'll probably go with Brahim Diaz as player of the tournament. I mean, he's done really well in qualifying, and his 7 goals, and I think that he's going to carry that over into the tournament. So I'm looking forward to seeing him from Morocco. Breakout star, I am hoping that for Nigeria's sake, that Ryan Lebiosu comes out good, becomes one of the players who, because Nigeria needs a spark. So hopefully he becomes one of those. For predicted winners, to be honest, with the way things are going, both on and off the field, I have a feeling that, there's something to be said for Morocco, and I would not be surprised if they win it.
Okay, and Leonard, what about you? So, player of the tournament, breakout star, predicted winners.
Player of the tournament, I'm going to agree with Colin and say Brahim Diaz, only because Achraf Hakimi won't be available for the first few games. Breakout star has to be one from Bafana Bafana. There are so many to go for. I'm going to go with Mohaou Nkota. I really, really like the way he's been playing for Al Ittifaq in Saudi Arabia. Very, very direct player, very skillful winger. And predicted winner, I'm going to have to go with Morocco.
Okay, so for me, I will join you on Morocco as my predicted tournament winners. It's written. I'm sorry. Should I go for Super Eagles? I just think it's written in the stars for Morocco. I think if I'm not allowed to choose them, I'll go for DRC, but I'm going to go for Morocco. Player of the tournament, look away now, Colin, but I want to see one of these Nigerian attackers really have a tournament to remember, whether it's Victor Osimhen, if he can stay fit, whether it's Chukwueze, if he can bring his Premier League form to bear at the Nations Cup, or whether it's Ademola Lookman, the previous African Footballer of the Year, but he's having a difficult time recently at Atalanta. Could this be the tournament where he reminds people of just what he's capable of? Outstanding at the last Nations Cup. It would be great for his legacy. Now 28, he's in his prime, to see another strong tournament for him. I think in terms of breakout star, I'd love to see El Hadj Malik Diouf at West Ham really give another dimension to this Senegal team down the left flank. Assane Diao is another young player at Senegal who I'm really excited about, and also Yann Diomanda of Côte d'Ivoire. And finally, I want to say two kind of veterans from Gabon, Denis Bouanga and Jim Alavina, who these two guys, they're in their 30s now, but either side of Aubameyang, they are a joy to watch, dribbling masters. And I just would love to see this veteran Gabon side really deliver a few unexpected stars of the Nations Cup. So I'd love to see a really strong tournament for those two players. So that's everything, guys. Thank you so much for the Nations Cup podcast. It's been great to look forward to the tournament. Great to give a preview, and I'm excited to see you both in Morocco.
No problem. Well, considering you always get it wrong, I don't know how all of this is going to work.